Pauline, ¿cuántos años lleváis trabajando para el gobierno británico en este proyecto de innovación para impulsar la gobernanza colectiva?
Desde el 2014.
Estábamos hablando antes y me decías que el hecho de que sea open no quiere decir que la administración tenga que compartirlo todo. ¿Dónde se ponen los límites?
Pues se ponen los límites según el proyecto y según el tema que se trabaja. Nosotros podemos trabajar cualquier tipo de temas y a veces por razones o bien políticas o por razones de seguridad, pues no hablamos abiertamente de los proyectos que hacemos. Pero eso no significa que no trabajemos de forma abierta. Podemos, por ejemplo, favorizar la colaboración entre diferentes equipos o incluso diferentes ministerios o también incluso a veces, aun en estos proyectos de los que no queremos hablar demasiado, invitar a algunos agentes del sector, o sea, de la ciudadanía.
Bueno, todo ello para cortar distancias, ¿no? Esa distancia que separa tanto a la administración de la ciudadanía. Pues bienvenida, muchas gracias por estar aquí. Te escuchamos.
Por invitarme. So, I'm Pauline and I'm from the Policy Lab. Today I'm going to tell you who are the Policy Lab, what do we do, how we do it, why we do it. I will try to give you a few examples of how we use tools in our projects, and I will give you some further information if you're interested in our work. So who are we? We're a very small team based at the Cabinet Office. We come from different backgrounds, mainly policy, design, and social research. So this is actually the Treasury building, but on the 4th floor you've got the Cabinet Office, which is a department that supports the Prime Minister and the Cabinet of the United Kingdom. So we get our desk from the Cabinet Office, but not our money. Our money, we get it from the different departments we can work with. So here we're in the center of Westminster, and all along that route you've got the different departments, so Department for Work and Pensions, Home Office, Ministry of Justice, you name it. So we work on a project basis with whatever team, with different teams from different departments, whoever needs our help. We were set up in 2014, 3 years ago, as part of the Civil Service Reform Plan. The idea was that the civil service needed to be more open and innovative. So what do we do exactly? Well, precisely, we help policymakers developing policies in a more open, data-driven, digital, and user-centered way. We do this by using design and research tools, and while doing this, we're trying to upskill civil servants in those methods. And one of the key things that we're doing is trying to create a neutral space where policymakers can be innovative. We try to bring together people who usually wouldn't work together and people who will use tools that they might never have used before. And that is very important because we are a lab, meaning that we experiment with things, with different approaches, different tools. And it is important because that means that we are a safe place for people to succeed or fail, and it's fine to fail. So that's why we encourage people to come to us. We experiment with ideas and approaches, and if they prove to be valuable, we encourage departments to use them. And we can do that in any kind of spaces, even the less innovative-looking spaces. This is one of the grandest rooms in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. So not the nice space Miki talked about before. I mean, it's nice, but different kind of nice. So we can work on any type of issues. We've worked on homelessness, how to prevent homelessness. We've worked on the future of rail. We've worked on house building data, how to provide better data for more houses to be built in the right place. We worked on digital forensics. So many projects. We believe we're quite successful, although it's not always easy to measure our impact. But one of the main proof, I'd say, is that 3 years after being set up, we still exist, which was not a given. So far, we've worked with more than 5,000 civil servants, and we reach much more through our toolkit that is online and our blog. And some of our projects have delivered good outcomes at a lower cost. For example, one of our first projects was on police digitization. For this project, we ended up creating a tool to report crime online, and that tool has been rolled out around England and Wales. And the policy team who worked on this project estimated that they were saving around 3.7 million pounds. So how we do this? What is our approach? I'm going to talk about things that you've already heard this morning. Our work is based on 4 main principles. One is that we should focus on users, meaning the citizens using public services. We should also base our work on evidence, not on the assumptions of policymakers, which very often is the case. We should co-design. This means that policymakers need to work with citizens, with private companies, with charities, any relevant organization for the projects you're working on. And you need to, we need to prototype things and taste again and again and again until having something meaningful. The general idea is to move away from that white hole idea where you think that if a policymaker might think that if something is not working, it's because it has not been explained well enough. Well, that might not be the case. It might be that it wasn't well designed in the first place. Also, as an anecdote, one of my colleagues who has been a civil servant for several years, in his 5 or 7 years at the Home Office, he never met once a member of the public. And obviously, that is the kind of thing that we want to change. We think that by using those 4 principles, we might end up creating better policies and save money. Because by understanding users, we create things that they need, not things that they don't need. We all know this kind of, we've all seen this kind of images, right? Where people do what they need to do. And this is an example outside our work, obviously. It's about Dyson, so the different prototype that they do. And I guess that Dyson tasted around 5,000 versions of one of their Hoover before they thought it was right. So imagine we could test and prototype 5,000 times a policy. That would be amazing. Unfortunately, I'm sure it's not going to happen because we're not working on the same time scale. But we need to, that's the way to go. Along those 4 principles, we've got the 3D ingredients, which is design, data, and digital. And we think that the best projects are the ones that combine those three ingredients. Why design? Because design, as you've heard this morning, can generate transformative ideas. And also because design is a useful way to tackle complex problems, and policy problems are always complex. By zooming on service user, you might have ideas on how different institutions might solve problems. So again, to give you an example outside of our work, but I will end up give you examples of our work at the end. I don't know if you remember this kind of shops where you could rent movies. I guess that their challenge was how can we deliver movies? And at some point, it didn't work quite well. And something like Netflix, they might have asked, how can people watch movies at home, which is not the same challenge. So it is very important to frame your challenge as clearly as possible, because everything will depend on it. Another ingredient, data. Data is useful to have a clear idea of what is happening and who the users are. We try to use qualitative data because we can understand better what people do, why they act in certain ways, and how they feel about it. We try also for some projects to use data science, because that way we can analyze a huge amounts of data very quickly, and we might find patterns that we didn't expect. And too often we find out that government doesn't have the right data to work with in the first place. Why digital? Because with digital technologies, we can reach much more people, whether it is to understand their views, or to generate ideas, or to provide services that might be accessible to more people. It's also a good way to keep improving the services you've created, because you're gathering data with those digital tools. So those new data might be useful. Having said that, we don't necessarily use digital in all of our projects. It's just a tool. It's not a solution for everything or for everyone. Our process might look like a little bit like this. We've got three main stages, again, in an ideal situation. First stage where we frame the challenge. Second one, we do some research, and then we do prototype and testing. And within each of these stages, we've got two phases. One where we open up as much as possible, meaning that we try to gather as much information, as much ideas as possible. We try to be creative. And then we need to close this. We need to refine. We need to focus on a few elements. We need to be practical. And all along this process, we try to be as open and collaborative as possible. That looks like quite beautiful, I don't know, but clear. Very often it's not like this. You may end up with framing and prototyping on framing and research. You may do prototyping very early on and iterate again and again with different people during different sessions. So that is just because it's to try to give you an idea, because very often when you're not inside the team, it's hard to understand. When I first arrived at the policy lab, I was like, what is this? So yeah, your thinking process, your designing process might look like this, very, very, very complex and tricky at the beginning, and little by little things becomes clearer. So what our tools and techniques are. Again, we use things that you've heard this morning. We can use open fears cards, challenge setting. As I said, framing your project is very important. We can use interviews, design ethnography. I will come back to that point later. Then we can use change cards, very, ID sketching at the start of a prototyping sessions. Many different things, and they're all available online. So some examples of how we use those tools and techniques. First of all, an example of a co-designing session with policymakers. That was a project focusing on how to use data to build more houses in the right place. That was a project for the Department for Communities and Local Government. So at the start of the project, we put policymakers into a room, and that looks a little bit like this. Well, pretty much like this. So policymakers from different teams within the same department, but also people from other departments. We used an evidence safari, for example, and that looks really weird, what an evidence safari. Well, it's just a way to present all the desk research that we had done before, and we cluster this into different topics that are relevant for the project, and we try to present it in a very visual way. So then the policymakers or the people in the room will go around the room, going at each of these station to look at the data, think about it, discuss the data that they've got in front of their eyes. It's a good way for people in a group to explore a large amount of data very quickly, because policymakers will not have the time to do a proper literature review and to read huge amount of reports. So we do this for them. Then, once they have this in mind, we, for example, make them do some user personas, which look like this. We try to make them imagine. So, who are the house builders you're interested in? Who are you talking about exactly? What are the issue that these people face? And they might not have the answers, or they might have assumptions, but it's the first way to make them think about the user. And we don't base any policy on that. Don't worry. It's just a way to create empathy, and later on the project, we've got different ways to create personas based on data that then the teams can use at any moment later on, even outside of the project. Then they tried to, for each of these type of house builders they were interested in, to try to see what is the process they go through to build a house, and which kind of data do they use or do they need at each stage, and that's raised a lot of questions, a lot of things that we don't know, we're not sure about. And we ended up with this really great map after doing in-depth interviews and after with house builders and doing interviews with data scientists within the government. So you've got the house building process, very generalized because we cannot enter into details. And you've got at each stages the kind of interventions, just very, very broad idea of in which area we might want to do something. And then all the data that relate to the different stages and the potential interventions. And here I have to say that an example of how it is to work within a government. In the middle of this project, we had general elections, and that was not within our plans, obviously. So, meaning that we couldn't conduct a huge public consultation. So we had to work only with the people the policy team was already in contact with somehow. That kind of things happen, and despite of this, you still have to go on with your project as well as you can. Example of film ethnography and speculative design. This was a project for the Department for Transport. They wanted our help to get a vision of what the future of rail could be. So we used film ethnography to understand the current experience of the users, of the citizens using rail. And we filmed, I think, around 9 different passengers, and along that, and we went with them while they were taking the tube of the train, and we could observe how they were doing things, what was problematic. We could ask them questions. What issue do you have here? And when I talk about ethnography, I want to be clear that we're not talking about ethnography, that research that you do within an academic environment. It would be really wonderful to have the luxury to spend months or years with people to really, really get a huge understanding, a detailed understanding of their experience. But we just don't have the time to do this. But what we do is still go with them half a day, one day, and it's still a good way to get a grasp of their experience. Then we did some speculative design. So the idea was to imagine a number of possible futures for rail, and we did different things. We used the data that the Department for Transport provided us with, type of data that could impact on passengers' experiences in the future. So we used this to imagine some scenarios. We also used the film ethnography that we did, to co-design products that you could have in this future scenario. That can be a new rail map, that can be a new app, different things. And then we tested those ideas with users. I'm going to skip. That was another example in a project about the future of aging. One of the things that we had to do was to run public workshops to explore what was the participants' reactions to different aspects of an aging population. One workshop was about the relationship between work and aging, and at the start it was a bit difficult. People had difficulty engaging with the idea of how the future could look like. So with an agency called Strange Telemetry, they created this type of images. This is a family-owned robot repair shop, and within explaining how the shop is working, etc., we could discuss with people to understand how they would react within that environment. a topic that was coming back again and again was loneliness. You know, like if people were thinking very often, like how would that, where is the human reaction in this type of shops if we're talking about robots? Can we actually interact with humans there? If we have to work in such shops, but we're old people, how you know, will young people want to work with us? How does that work? You know, being different generations working together. So it was just to get a first discussion started. An example of co-designing with citizens. We recently finished a project on how to improve the experiences of tenants and landlords in the private rented sector. And we used sessions with citizens at different stages of the project. So for example, at the beginning of the project, it could be to define what are the key user groups we want to focus on. So we held separate sessions with landlords and with tenants. At another point of the project, we held a session with people coming from tenants associations, but also charities working on housing, policymakers, and trying to think all together about the key issues after presenting them the research that we had done, all the data that we had done, that we had. And they could start thinking about, within all this information, what is key for us, why, and try to prototype things that, again, we would taste later on with landlords on a side and tenants on another one. If you're interested in knowing more about our tools and our projects, you can very easily type Open Policy Making Toolkit. Everything is on gov.uk. We also blog there. We've got a book also written by Lucy Kimball, who is a designer and who worked at the start of setting up the policy lab. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much to you, Pauline. Well, we have questions, but we will only, with the public, in front of the public, do one. It's about the attitude of different departments of the government and the policy makers that you work with. Do they see you as something they would prefer to avoid? Or is it really useful, your work, for them? Do you feel that they believe in it?
I think it depends. There's just not one answer. It depends very much. At the moment, we've been very lucky in the sense that people, departments, policymakers are coming to us. We don't have to run after them because they've heard from colleagues, oh, there's this weird team working on that project. That might be interesting. And there's different type of reactions. Some people are really like, wow, this is wonderful, like do this more and more. Others, and that might be most of the people, it's like, yeah, well, let's try. You know? And the people that we're not working with yet, in the future maybe, it's people who absolutely think that what we're doing is crap.
Mm-hmm. So it's a matter of believing, actually. I mean, you really have to believe so that things improve.
I think it's about being open to new ways of working. And it's not, change is not always easy.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Pauline.
Thanks
for your talk.